To understand how the pre-colonial empires of West Africa accumulated their legendary wealth, we have to look past the mystical imagery of the desert and analyze the rigid geographic logic that dictated the flow of resources. In the north lies the Sahara Desert. It is an environment entirely hostile to agriculture, but it possesses vast, highly lucrative reserves of rock salt. Far to the south lie the dense tropical forests. This zone is abundant in rainfall and food, holding massive deposits of raw gold. This map reveals a geographic contradiction. Southern forest populations required salt, while northern desert networks demanded gold. The incentive for exchange was absolute, but between them sits an enormous expanse of land, acting as a sheer physical barrier to trade. Both biomes possessed the supply and the demand necessary to generate immense wealth, if only the physical goods could be reliably moved between them. Building an empire in West Africa meant overcoming the extreme logistical friction of moving heavy freight across a continent. That barrier is the Sahel, a massive, arid strip of savanna directly separating the deep desert from the southern forests. Moving mass across space requires energy. In economics, this is known as the friction of distance, the inherent, unavoidable cost of transportation. In the medieval period, moving heavy slabs of salt or bulk copper across the specific terrain meant relying entirely on land-based transit using pack animals. Camels are slow, they carry limited payloads, and require massive amounts of water to survive a journey taking months. Every calorie spent on survival is a calorie deducted from the profit of the cargo. Land-based transit across the Sahel was thermodynamically exhausting. The state that successfully connected these biomes would control the wealth of the continent. The Niger River provided the ultimate infrastructural workaround for the Sahel. Instead of flowing directly to the ocean, it cuts up from the Guinean highlands, arches deep into the Sahara Desert, then curves back, flowing southeast for thousands of miles into the Gulf of Guinea. This strange boomerang shape exists because the Niger is essentially two ancient rivers that eventually eroded into each other and joined together. In a region defined by land-based friction, the Niger River functioned as a massive, naturally occurring, navigable conveyor belt piercing directly into the deep desert. To exploit it, merchants utilized massive, hollowed-out wooden canoes capable of carrying immense cargo. A single large river canoe could carry the payload of dozens of land-based camels. Pushing weight across water requires a small fraction of the caloric energy needed to drag that same weight across sand. By loading goods onto the river and letting the downstream current do the mechanical work, merchants bypassed the traditional costs of distance. The Niger River was the only low-friction freight corridor capable of moving industrial-scale wealth across the region, making it the most valuable asset in Africa. Midway along its arc lies the inland Niger Delta, a sprawling, hyper-fertile wetland sitting squarely in an otherwise dry landscape. Every year, the river overflows its banks, depositing fresh silt and replenishing the surrounding soil with vital nutrients. This predictable cycle created an agricultural explosion, allowing for the mass production of indigenous crops like African rice, sorghum, and millet. This massive surplus of food exceeded local survival needs. It functioned as exportable caloric energy. River fleets loaded with this bulk grain and dried fish pushed upstream, delivering reliable calories to the non-arable trading regions in the north. Without this continuous high-volume flow of food, the massive trading cities situated on the edge of the desert would have starved. The inland delta was the engine room of the empire, providing the necessary caloric fuel to power the entire trans-Saharan logistics network. Further up the river bend sat sprawling urban centers like Djenne and Timbuktu. While later explorers romanticized these locations as mystical desert oases, their purpose was deeply pragmatic. Timbuktu and Djenne were monumental warehousing hubs, commercial ports, and centers of high-level imperial administration. They possessed the organized infrastructure required to handle industrial bulk freight, featuring towering mud brick warehouses known as fondaks, structured port docks, and fortified walls. Their locations were mathematically precise, engineered at the exact choke points of trade. This map illustrates the intersection. These cities sat exactly where the navigable river conveyor belt met the starting terminal of the trans-Saharan camel routes. These cities were deliberately engineered interface points, built to force the intersection of two entirely different freight networks. Controlling this intersection required the administrative muscle of a centralized state, governed by an assembly of leaders and merchants known as the Gbara. They stationed imperial tax collectors at the river ports to constantly audit incoming and outgoing cargo. When the heavy slabs of desert rock salt were offloaded from arriving camels, the state extracted a specific tariff on every single load before it could be moved onto the riverboats. They also maintained a strict monopoly on the gold trade. Only the king was permitted to hold gold nuggets. Merchants were forced by law to transact purely in gold dust. By standing directly between the supply and the demand, the state converted the geographic bottleneck into an imperial toll booth. This map, part of the 1375 Catalan Atlas, illustrates the result of this highly regulated system. It depicts Mansa Musa wearing a gold crown and holding a massive gold ingot, representing wealth so vast it famously crashed bullion prices in Cairo. Mali operated on a triple income architecture, taxing the transit of goods, monopolizing wholesale exchange at the ports, and directly controlling the natural resources at their source. The Mali Empire secured its legendary scale by maintaining a flawless administrative chokehold over the most efficient logistical conveyor belt in Africa.